Herbert John Bennett was born in 1879. In July 1897, he married his then-pregnant girlfriend, Mary Jane Clark, a music teacher 3 years his senior, at the West Ham Registrar's Office in London, although the baby was later stillborn. He had wooed her with grand ambition, but in the end he worked as a newsagent's assistant, then a grocer's assistant at the Woolwich cooperative stores, and at one stage a sewing machine salesman. However, money seemed to be unaccounted for wherever Bennett worked. The couple then headed to Cape Town in South Africa under their new assumed name of Hood. The job situation didn't work out there and they returned to England just a few days later, but the marriage fell into difficulties, and by 1900 the couple were leading separate lives, with Mary Jane living in Glencoe Villas in Bexley Heath in Kent with their daughter Ruby. Every once in a while, Bennett would send his estranged wife a little money as he found steadier work at the Woolwich Arsenal. By this time he had made the acquaintance of a young woman, Alice Meadows, a parlour-maid. He met her family and took the young woman away for a brief holiday to Yarmouth, where they occupied separate rooms in the Crown and Anchor on 4th August. Bennett and Alice became engaged and talked of wedding plans. On the morning of Sunday 23rd September 1900, a woman's body was discovered by 14-year-old John Norton on Yarmouth's South Beach. She'd been asphyxiated, a mohair bootlace tied round her neck, and it was believed she died the day before, but police found it difficult to identify her. It was ascertained that she'd been staying in a guest house run by Mr. and Mrs. John Rudrum in the seaside town since 15th September, under the name of Mrs. Hood. On Friday 21st September, she'd received a letter postmarked Woolwich at the guest house, addressed to a Mrs. Hood. With her was her young daughter, Ruby. The police soon realised Hood was an alias. Under the direction of Detective Inspector Lingwood, they searched her room, finding a photograph, a purse containing a latchkey, which was later identified as belonging to the Bexley Heath house, the return half of a first-class train ticket out of Liverpool Street Station in London, and a gold brooch with the word "baby" inscribed on it. He found no letters or documents that would help identify her, and when he interviewed Mrs. Rudrum, the landlady of the guest house, she told him that she only knew her as Mrs. Hood, but that she wore a gold chain and a small silver watch. Both of these family heirlooms were missing. By the end of October, the dead woman still hadn't been identified, and a coroner's jury returned the verdict that the woman unknown had been murdered by a man unknown. What also puzzled police was the laundry mark on her petticoat. These marks were commonly added to clothing sent off to laundries and washhouses as an identifier, and in this particular case, the number printed was 599. Woolwich laundries were all asked to check if they'd had a garment with that number, but none had, so the article was published in the press. A laundry manageress in Bexley Heath saw the photograph and recognised it, and after looking through her own records, informed the police that it had belonged to a Mrs. Bennett. Meanwhile, in London, Bennett saw the news of the discovery in a newspaper and mentioned it to Alice and her sister in the passing, asking why it was taking the police so long to catch the killer. Soon, police came knocking at his door, and he was arrested for the murder of his wife, Mary Jane. During the arrest, he exclaimed, "Yarmouth? Why, I have never been to Yarmouth in my life." He also told them he hadn't lived with his wife since January, as he claimed he found love letters in her pocket from another man. During a search at the house, police discovered the gold chain and silver watch in Bennett's portmanteau, along with 2 pearl necklaces, 14 letters from Alice Meadows, a bunch of keys, a revolver and cartridges, a black bag, 2 wigs, 1 male, 1 female, and a false moustache. He was remanded in custody in Norwich, but his trial was moved to London. On Monday, 25th February 1901, 25-year-old Bennett's trial got underway at the Old Bailey before Lord Chief Justice Richard Webster. The Crown prosecution case was led by Mr. C.F. Gill, Mr. Poyser and Mr. Miller. Bennett was defended by Sir Edward Marshall Hall, King's Counsel, Mr. G. Thorne Drury, Mr. Forrest Fulton, and Mr. Labouchere. During his trial, he kept to his story, even though the facts spoke for themselves, especially the evidence from the laundry manageress, without whom the guilty party may never have been found. It was also fortuitous that a beach photographer, William Cousins, had been taking photographs earlier in the week when the body was discovered, and Mary Jane was seen wearing the necklace and watch. It also transpired at the trial that Bennett had gone to visit Mary Jane on 14 September at Bexley Heath, and again the following day. He then went to Yarmouth by train and stayed in the Crown and Anchor, run by publican Thomas Henry Keats, overnight. On 22nd September, Bennett was identified as being at the South Quay Distillery Public House, managed by William Thomas Borking, with a woman identified as his dead wife. Borking saw them between 9:30 and 10 o'clock that evening. 2 other witnesses, Alfred Mason and his girlfriend Blanche Smith, also saw the couple on the beach and heard the woman say, "Mercy, mercy." Shortly before midnight, Bennett returned to the Crown and Anchor, out of breath, and went to bed, then left for London the next morning. His landlady, Mrs. Pankhurst, confirmed he'd been away from his lodgings at Union Street in Woolwich on the night of 22nd September. Emma Elliston of Plumstead also told the court that when Bennett and his wife lodged with her, she had heard Bennett say during one of their quarrels that he wished she was dead. 3 days after his return, he was arranging to marry Alice Meadows and began giving her his wife's property. Robert Allen, who worked with Bennett, asked him around the 10th or 11th of October where his wife was, and said Bennett told him, "She is down home," then said, "I have no wife. I am about to be married." Even Marshall Hall, one of the most noted barristers at the time, couldn't get Bennett off, with the jury finding him guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death on Saturday, 2nd March. Placing his hands on the front of the dock, Bennett declared in a firm voice, "I say, I am not guilty, sir." Bennett was executed at Norwich Jail on the morning of Thursday 21st March 1901 at 9 o'clock, then buried within the prison grounds. Many years later, some doubt was cast on his conviction. In July 1912, another murder took place at Yarmouth under very similar circumstances, in that a bootlace was used to strangle the victim, 18-year-old Dora Mae Gray. Her killer was never found. As for little Ruby, she was eventually given into the care of a relative of Bennett's.